When the old dishwasher, his knuckles raw and his spirit worn thin, offered his only meal to the shivering, disguised billionaire in the alley, he did so without an inkling of who the man truly was or the monumental change his simple act of kindness was about to set in motion. He saw only a fellow soul in the grip of the biting November cold, a brother in hardship needing a moment of warmth more than he needed the dry bread and cheese he had been looking forward to for 10 grueling hours. The dishwasher, Leo, never could have imagined that this stranger, a man he believed to be as destitute as himself, was Alistair Finch, the reclusive owner of the entire restaurant empire, a man so lost in his own gilded cage that he had taken to the streets to find one single solitary reason to believe in humanity again. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The rain fell in relentless, sleeting sheets, each drop a tiny shard of ice that struck the grimy asphalt of the back alley with a hiss. It was a sound Leo had grown accustomed to, the city's melancholic soundtrack to his life of ceaseless toil. His body ached with a fatigue that had settled deep into his bones, a permanent resident in the house of his weary muscles. For 10 hours he had stood before the industrial maw of the restaurant's dishwashing machine, a metal beast that roared and steamed and spat, turning his hands into a permanent state of red, puckered flesh. He was halfway through his 16-hour workday, a brutal marathon he ran 6 days a week, but the second half of which was a secret carried only by him, the night manager, and the silent, unpitying moon. He clutched a small, grease-stained paper bag, its contents the meager reward for his first shift, a small, slightly stale bread roll with a single slice of sweating cheese. He leaned against the cold brick wall, the damp seeping through his thin, frayed jacket, and closed his eyes for just a moment, a fleeting attempt to escape into the darkness behind his eyelids. It was then that he heard it, a soft, rattling cough that was nearly swallowed by the sound of the downpour. He opened his eyes and saw him, an old man huddled in the shallow alcove of a boarded-up doorway, his clothes little more than sodden rags clinging to a skeletal frame. The man's shivering was violent, a tremor that seemed to shake him from the inside out. His face, etched with the deep lines of a hard life, was a pale, ghostly white in the dim security light. Leo's heart, a muscle he thought had been numbed by his own perpetual struggle, gave a painful clench. He knew that look. It was the quiet desperation of a man who had been forgotten by the world, a man who had become invisible. Without a second thought, without weighing his own hunger against the stranger's need, Leo pushed himself off the wall and walked over. The old man flinched as he approached, his eyes wide with a fear that Leo found more chilling than the cold itself. "It's all right," Leo said, his voice soft, barely audible above the rain. "I'm not going to hurt you." He held out the paper bag. "Here, you need this more than I do." The old man stared at the bag, then up at Leo, his gaze searching, skeptical. This was the test. Alistair Finch, the man beneath the rags, had orchestrated this moment 100 times in 100 different alleys, and each time he had been met with suspicion, with scorn, or worse, with complete indifference. He had begun to believe that the well of human decency had run dry. But this was different. There was no hesitation in the dishwasher's eyes, no calculation, only a simple, profound, and utterly genuine offering. Alistair slowly reached out a trembling hand and took the bag. His fingers brushed against Leo's, and he was struck by the calloused, rough warmth of the man's skin. Leo then began to shrug off his own jacket. It wasn't much, a threadbare coat with a broken zipper, but it was the only barrier he had against the punishing cold. "Take this too," he said, draping it over the old man's shaking shoulders. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Alistair, the man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, who commanded armies of lawyers and accountants, was speechless. He was wrapped in the worn fabric of a stranger's kindness, a warmth that had nothing to do with thread count and everything to do with the heart of the man who stood before him, shivering now in just his thin, stained work shirt. Leo gave a small, sad smile. "Stay safe," he whispered, before turning and walking back into the deafening steam and clatter of the kitchen, unaware that he had just saved a man not from the cold, but from the crushing poverty of his own soul. Alistair Finch sat in the darkness, the meager sandwich in his hand feeling heavier than all the gold in his vaults, and knew he had found what he was looking for. He now had to understand the man who had so effortlessly given it. The very next morning, a memo circulated through the corporate headquarters of Finch Hospitality Group, an announcement that caused a ripple of confusion among the executive staff. Alistair Finch, a man who hadn't set foot in one of his own kitchens in over a decade, had mandated the creation of a new ground-level immersion program. The official story was that it was for a senior executive who needed to understand the company's inner workings. The reality was that Alistair Finch himself was going undercover. He had a team create a flawless new identity for him: Arthur Vance, a widower in his late 60s who had lost his pension and was forced back into the workforce. The disguise was meticulously crafted, not the theatrical rags of the night before, but the subtle, soul-crushing uniform of the working poor: worn-out orthopedic shoes, cheap polyester trousers, and a faded, apologetic demeanor. He arranged to be hired as a trainee kitchen porter at his flagship restaurant, the Empyrean, the very same kitchen where he had met Leo. The transition was jarring, a violent collision of two worlds. One day he was in his penthouse apartment, a sterile glass box in the clouds where the silence was broken only by the hum of the climate control system, surrounded by abstract art and minimalist furniture. The next, he was in the belly of the beast, a subterranean world of searing heat, clanging steel, and the chaotic, overlapping shouts of the chefs. The air was thick with the smells of grease, disinfectant, and the nervous sweat of the staff. His new locker was a dented metal box that smelled of rust and old socks. The manager, a man named Marcus Thorne, gave him a cursory glance, his eyes filled with a bored disdain that made it clear he viewed Arthur as nothing more than another piece of aging, unreliable equipment. "Stay out of the way, do what you're told, and don't break anything, old man," Marcus grunted before pointing a thick finger towards the dish pit. "You'll be working with Leo. He'll show you what to do." Alistair's heart gave a strange leap at the name. He turned and saw him. Leo was already there, his back to them, moving with an efficient, practiced grace amidst the chaos, his hands a blur as he sorted and sprayed a mountain of dirty plates. He looked even more tired under the harsh fluorescent lights of the kitchen, the shadows under his eyes like deep bruises. He didn't seem to notice the new arrival. Alistair, now Arthur, shuffled forward, a feeling of profound unreality washing over him. He was a king in disguise, a phantom in his own palace, about to become the apprentice of the one man who had shown him a kindness he had long forgotten was possible. He felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Could he do this? Could he keep up the facade, endure the physical labor, and most importantly, get close enough to Leo to understand the mystery of the man who gave away his last meal and worked in the shadows for reasons unknown? He took a deep breath, the humid, greasy air filling his lungs, and stepped into the deafening roar of the dish pit, leaving the world of Alistair Finch behind. He was Arthur now, and his education was about to begin. The first shift was a lesson in humility, a brutal and humbling ordeal for a man whose hands had not known a day of hard labor in over 40 years. The sheer volume of dishes was staggering, an endless porcelain tide that flowed from the pristine dining room above. Alistair, as Arthur, felt clumsy and inept. His hands, accustomed to the weight of a fountain pen or a crystal tumbler, fumbled with the heavy, slick plates. He was too slow, his movements awkward and inefficient. Within the first hour, he had dropped a stack of saucers, the resulting crash echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. The entire line went silent for a beat, and every head turned towards the dish pit. Marcus, the manager, stormed over, his face a mask of fury. "Are you a complete idiot, old man?" he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Those are hand-painted porcelain. They cost more than you make in a week." Alistair felt a hot flush of shame and anger. He was used to commanding respect, to having his every word treated as law. Here, he was less than nothing, an inconvenience. He opened his mouth to retort, the powerful, cutting words of a CEO on the tip of his tongue, but he stopped himself just in time. He was Arthur. He had to be Arthur. He simply looked down at the floor and mumbled, "I'm sorry. It was an accident." Before Marcus could unleash another volley of abuse, Leo stepped quietly between them. He didn't look at Marcus. His focus was on the floor, where he was already squatting down, carefully picking up the larger shards of broken porcelain. "It's my fault, Marcus," Leo said, his voice quiet but steady. I should have shown him how to stack them properly. They were slippery. The lie was so simple, so selfless, that it took Alistair's breath away. Leo was taking the blame, shielding a complete stranger from the manager's wrath without a moment's hesitation. Marcus grunted, mollified by the quick confession, and shot Alistair one last venomous glare. "Just clean it up, and you," he jabbed a finger at Leo, "train the fossil properly or it's coming out of your pay." He then stalked off, his authority reasserted. The kitchen noise swelled back to its normal roar. Leo finished gathering the broken pieces and disposed of them. He then turned to Alistair, his expression unreadable. "You have to brace the stack with your arm, like this," he demonstrated, his movements fluid and economical. "And never carry more than 10 at a time." There was no judgment in his voice, no hint of annoyance at having to cover for a clumsy old man. He simply stated it as a fact, a piece of necessary information for survival in this chaotic environment. For the rest of the shift, Leo worked beside him, a silent, patient teacher. He would subtly correct Alistair's posture to ease the strain on his back, show him the most efficient way to load the washer, and quietly move the heaviest racks before Alistair had to struggle with them. Alistair watched him, fascinated. Leo was a master of his domain, a conductor of this symphony of steam and steel, but it was the quiet dignity that struck Alistair the most. Leo never complained. He never gossiped with the other kitchen staff. He simply worked, his focus absolute, his face a neutral mask that betrayed nothing. Yet Alistair could see the profound exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. This was a man running on reserves, a man pushing his body and spirit to their absolute limit, and Alistair was more determined than ever to find out why. As the days bled into a week, Alistair settled into the grueling rhythm of the kitchen. His body screamed in protest. Muscles he didn't know, he had ached with a deep, throbbing pain. His hands were raw, and his back felt permanently hunched. Yet, with each passing day, his respect for Leo grew into a quiet awe. He also began to observe the strange, unspoken arrangement that was at the heart of his investigation. At precisely 10 o'clock each night, Leo would walk to the time clock, punch out, and then, instead of leaving, he would simply walk back to the dish pit and continue working. It was a seamless transition, so practiced that most of the staff didn't even seem to notice. The second half of his night began without ceremony, an unpaid, unofficial continuation of his labor. Alistair started listening more closely to the kitchen gossip, the whispers exchanged over the prep stations and during cigarette breaks in the alley. The theories about Leo were varied and often cruel. "He's got a gambling debt," a young line cook sneered one afternoon. "Marcus has him by the throat." Another prep chef offered a different theory, tinged with a sort of pity. "I heard his wife is sick. He's paying off some loan shark for her medicine." A cynical server suggested he was just a fool, a simpleton who didn't know any better, easily exploited by a manager like Marcus. None of it felt right to Alistair. There was no fear in Leo's eyes when Marcus was around, only a weary resignation. And he was far from a fool. Alistair saw a sharp intelligence in his efficient movements and the way he anticipated the needs of the kitchen before anyone even had to ask. The mystery only deepened. Marcus, for his part, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in the arrangement. He would often pile the most disgusting, labor-intensive work on Leo during his off-the-clock hours, scrubbing the grease traps, cleaning the floor mats, tasks that were supposed to be shared among the entire closing crew. He treated Leo with a casual contempt, as if the man's willingness to work for free was a personal affront to him, a weakness he had to constantly poke and prod. Alistair watched it all, his anger a slow-burning fire in his gut. This was happening in his company, under his name. This exploitation was being funded by the profits that flowed into his bank accounts. He had built an empire on the principles of quality and excellence. Yet here, in its very engine room, there was a rot, a cancer of cruelty and indifference that he had been completely blind to. He tried to question Leo directly one night, as they stood side by side, their hands submerged in greasy water. "Leo," he began, keeping his voice casual, "I noticed you stay late. You don't have to do that. It's not right that you're not getting paid." Leo didn't look at him. He continued scrubbing a stubborn pot, his movements never faltering. "It's an arrangement," he said, his voice flat and non-committal. "It works for me, but it's not fair." Alistair pressed gently. Leo finally stopped and turned to look at him, and for a fleeting moment, Alistair saw a flash of something in his eyes, a deep, profound sadness that was almost bottomless. It was a look that said he carried a weight Alistair could not possibly comprehend. "Fairness has nothing to do with it," Leo said softly. "It's just what needs to be done." He then turned back to his work, the conversation clearly over. The wall was back up, higher and thicker than before. Alistair knew then that he would have to find another way in. The answer wasn't in the kitchen. The answer was somewhere in the life Leo lived during the few precious hours he was away from this place. Driven by a need to understand that now bordered on obsession, Alistair decided to cross a line. He knew it was an invasion of privacy, a violation of the trust he was trying to build as Arthur, but he felt he had no other choice. One night, after Leo finally left the restaurant long after midnight, Alistair followed him. He kept a safe distance, a shadowy figure moving through the deserted city streets, feeling like a spy in his own kingdom. The opulence of the city center, with its gleaming towers and designer storefronts, many of which were his own tenants, gradually gave way to a landscape of urban decay. The streets became narrower, the buildings more decrepit, the air thick with the smell of damp and neglect. Leo walked with a steady, determined gait, the walk of a man who knows his path by heart and has no energy to waste. He didn't look around, his gaze fixed on the broken pavement in front of him. He was a ghost moving through a forgotten part of the world. Finally, Leo turned into a run-down tenement building, its brick facade stained with years of pollution and its windows like vacant eyes. A single bare bulb flickered above the entrance, casting a weak, sickly yellow light. Alistair watched from across the street as Leo disappeared inside. A few moments later, a light came on in a window on the third floor. It was a small, solitary square of warmth in the vast, indifferent darkness of the building. Alistair stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, just staring at that window. He imagined Leo inside, in a small, sparse room, finally allowing the crushing weight of his exhaustion to settle upon him. What did he think about in those quiet moments? Did he have a family? Were there photographs on his walls? What hopes and dreams did this man harbor in his heart, and what had happened to extinguish their light, leaving only this relentless, punishing routine? A profound sense of shame washed over Alistair. He was standing on a grimy street, wearing a costume, spying on a good man's life. He felt like a tourist in the landscape of real human struggle. The chasm between his life and Leo's seemed impossibly vast. His own problems, the loneliness of his vast apartment, the boredom of his immense wealth, the hollow echo of a past tragedy felt indulgent and trivial in the face of the stark, grinding reality of Leo's existence. He had come out here to find a reason to believe in humanity, and he had found it in Leo. But in doing so, he had also found a damning indictment of himself. He, Alistair Finch, had created and profited from a system that allowed a man like Leo to be pushed to the very edge, to be so invisible that his suffering was just background noise. The light in the third-floor window was more than just a light. It was a beacon of resilience, a tiny, flickering flame of human dignity, refusing to be extinguished. And Alistair knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the night air, that he was responsible for shielding that flame, for finding out what storm was threatening to snuff it out for good. He turned and walked away. The image of that solitary window burned into his mind. The investigation was no longer just about curiosity. It was now a mission. The kitchen became Alistair's observatory, and Leo was his singular focus. He learned to read the subtle language of the man's exhaustion, the slight tremor in his hand as he lifted a heavy pot, the way his shoulders would slump for a fraction of a second when he thought no one was watching, the dark, bruised circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. He also began to notice another of Leo's quiet rituals. At the end of shared with anyone, he talked about his parents, who had passed away years ago, and his quiet, solitary life. He even shared a glimpse of a dream he had long since abandoned. "I used to love to cook," he confessed one afternoon, a wistful look in his eyes. "My mother taught me. She said I had a gift. I even started saving up for culinary school a long time ago. But life happened." He shrugged, a gesture of resignation that broke Alistair's heart. Here was a man with a passion for creating, for nourishing others, who was trapped in a cycle of cleaning up after them instead. Alistair listened, his heart aching. He encouraged Leo to talk about it, asking him what dishes he loved to make. Leo's face would light up for a moment as he described a perfect beef bourguignon or the secret to his mother's apple pie. In those fleeting moments, Alistair saw the man Leo could have been, the man he should have been, if the world had been a little kinder. These conversations were both a comfort and a torture for Alistair. They brought him closer to the friend he was growing to admire deeply, but they also underscored the immense debt that was owed to this man. Alistair wasn't just going to restore Leo's financial security, he was going to restore his dream. He was going to give him back the life that had been stolen from him, piece by piece. The coffee ritual was more than just a caffeine boost. It was a promise. It was Alistair's silent vow that soon Leo would no longer be standing in a cold alley drinking cheap coffee before a grueling shift. Soon, he would be the one in the chef's whites, the master of his own kitchen, and the world would finally get to taste the gift he had kept hidden for so long. One Sunday, their only shared day off, Leo approached Alistair with a hesitant, almost shy demeanor. "Arthur," he began, twisting a worn napkin in his hands. "I don't suppose, you don't have to, but I'm going to see Maya today. Her grandmother, Maria, she gets a little lonely. She loves to have company." He looked up, his eyes filled with a hopeful vulnerability. "I just thought, if you weren't busy, you might like to come along. Maria makes the best empanadas." The invitation was a profound gesture of trust, and Alistair felt a lump form in his throat. Leo was inviting him into the inner sanctum of his life, into the very heart of the promise he was working himself to death to keep. "I would be honored, Leo," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. They took a bus to a different part of the city, to a small but immaculately clean apartment in a modest building. The moment the door opened, they were greeted by a whirlwind of bright, youthful energy. "Uncle Leo!" A little girl with big dark eyes and a radiant smile shouted, throwing her arms around Leo's legs. This was Maya. She was beautiful, a perfect fusion of life and innocence. An elderly woman with a kind, wrinkled face and warm eyes followed her. "Leo, it is so good to see you. And you have brought a friend." Maria greeted Alistair with a genuine warmth that made him feel instantly welcome. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was filled with love. Drawings, clearly made by a child, were taped to every wall. The air smelled of cinnamon and baking dough. For the first time, Alistair was seeing the direct result of Leo's sacrifice. This home, this warmth, this little girl's smile, this was what Leo was fighting for. Maya immediately took to Alistair, pulling him by the hand to show him her collection of toys. He found himself on the floor, playing with dolls for the first time in decades, a genuine smile on his face. He saw the way Maya looked at Leo, with a pure, uncomplicated adoration. And he saw the way Leo looked at her, his face softening, the deep lines of exhaustion momentarily erased, replaced by a look of fierce, protective love. Maria served them coffee and fresh, hot empanadas, and she spoke to Alistair as if he were an old friend. She spoke of Samuel, her beloved grandson, with a mixture of profound sadness and unwavering hope. "We pray for him every day," she said, her eyes welling up, "and we are so grateful for the company's disability payments. Without them, I don't know what we would do. They are a blessing from God." Alistair looked at Leo, who quickly looked down at his plate, his face a mixture of guilt and pain at the well-intentioned deception. Alistair felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of him. He was sitting in a room sustained by a lie, a beautiful, heartbreaking lie, all spun by the quiet hero sitting next to him. He watched Maya laugh as Leo made a funny face, and he knew that he would move heaven and earth to protect this family. Leaving the apartment a few hours later, Alistair felt fundamentally changed. He was no longer just an observer or a benefactor. He was a part of this story now. Leo had invited him in, and in doing so, had entrusted him with his most precious secret. The weight of that trust was immense, and it solidified his resolve into something as hard and as permanent as diamond. The breaking point arrived with the brutal suddenness of a lightning strike. It came on a Tuesday evening, during the dinner rush. Leo received a phone call. Alistair, standing nearby, saw the color drain from Leo's face. His entire body went rigid, and the phone slipped from his trembling hand, clattering to the dirty floor. "Leo, what is it?" Alistair asked, rushing to his side. Leo stared at him. his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to swallow all the light in the room. "It's Samuel," he whispered, his voice a dry, cracking sound. "The ventilator that helps him breathe. It malfunctioned. They need to replace it immediately. The hospital says the insurance won't cover this specific model. They're calling it experimental." He staggered back against the stainless steel counter, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes as if to block out the world. "They need $20,000 by tomorrow morning." The sum was so impossibly large, so laughably out of reach, that it felt like a death sentence. $20,000. To Leo, it might as well have been 20 million. It was a mountain he could never hope to climb. "I don't have it," he choked out, his voice thick with despair. "I have nothing. All the money, it goes to them. I have a few hundred in savings, that's it." He looked utterly defeated, the monumental effort of the past 6 months crumbling into dust around him. The 16-hour days, the exhaustion, the pain, it was all for nothing. He had pushed his body to its absolute limit, and it still wasn't enough. The world was too cruel, the hole too deep to fill. "I could sell my apartment," he murmured, more to himself than to Alistair. "It's all I have left from my parents, but it would never go through in time." The hope in his voice was so faint, so fragile, it was barely there at all. Alistair watched as the quiet, resilient man he had come to admire so deeply finally broke. The weight was too much to bear. Leo slumped onto a nearby stool, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The cacophony of the kitchen, the shouting, the clanging, the hissing of the grills faded into a distant roar. In that moment, there was only the sound of a good man's heart breaking. Alistair placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple, solid point of contact in the swirling chaos of Leo's despair. The rage inside Alistair had cooled, solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. This was it. The final injustice. The system, the faceless bureaucracy, and the simple, cruel mechanics of fate had conspired to deliver this final, crushing blow. But Alistair was not a part of that system. He was the man who owned it, and he was about to bring its full, unstoppable force to bear. The game was over. The time for Arthur Vance, the kindly old man, was at an end. Tomorrow, Alistair Finch would return. The next day, the air in the kitchen was thick with a tense, oppressive silence. Leo moved like a zombie, his eyes hollowed out, his movements slow and mechanical. The news about Samuel's ventilator had spread through the staff in hushed whispers. There was a sense of impending doom. Everyone knew the situation was hopeless. Marcus, however, seemed to revel in Leo's despair. He watched him with a cruel smirk, taking a perverse satisfaction in seeing the unbreakable man finally broken. He chose this moment, the moment of Leo's absolute lowest ebb, to assert his dominance one final time. Leo, his mind a million miles away, accidentally dropped a single plate. It didn't even break, just clattered loudly on the rubber mat. It was a minor mistake, something that happened a dozen times a shift. But for Marcus, it was an opportunity. "Pathetic," Marcus boomed, his voice cutting through the kitchen noise. Every head snapped up. "Look at you! You can't even hold a plate straight!" He walked over to Leo, puffing out his chest. Leo didn't respond. He just stared at the plate on the floor. "You come in here, working your little secret shift, thinking you're some kind of saint," Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "But you know what you are, Leo? You're a doormat. A ghost. You're nothing. All your pathetic effort, and for what? You couldn't even save him. You failed." The words were like physical blows, each one designed to inflict maximum pain. It was a display of casual, monstrous cruelty, and it was the final straw. From the other side of the dish pit, a voice, calm and quiet but ringing with an undeniable authority, spoke. "That's enough, Marcus." Every eye in the kitchen swiveled to the source. It was Arthur. The old, clumsy porter was standing straight, his posture transformed. The apologetic shuffle was gone, replaced by a stillness, a sense of coiled power. Marcus scoffed, turning to face him. "And who do you think you are, old man? The new dishwashers union rep?" He took a menacing step towards Alistair. "Get back to work before I fire you." Alistair didn't flinch. He met Marcus's glare with an icy calm that was far more intimidating than any shout. He slowly reached up and took off the worn, grease-stained beanie he always wore, revealing a full head of distinguished silver hair. He looked Marcus directly in the eye, and the full, formidable weight of his true identity seemed to settle into his features. The weary, downtrodden Arthur Vance vanished, and in his place stood someone else entirely, a man of immense power and unshakable command. "My name," he said, his voice low and clear, each word a perfectly polished stone, "is Alistair Finch, and you are standing in my kitchen." The silence that descended upon the kitchen was absolute and immediate. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The clatter of pans, the sizzle of the grill, the shouts of the line cooks, everything ceased. The only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system. Marcus Thorne's face went through a rapid, comical series of transformations. First, disbelief, his mouth hanging slightly open. Then, confusion, as he tried to process the impossible statement. Finally, a dawning, sickening horror spread across his features as he truly looked at the man in front of him. He recognized the eyes from the photographs in the company's annual reports, the piercing gaze of the billionaire founder he had never met. His face turned a pale, ashen gray. The kitchen staff were frozen in place, a tableau of shock. Knives hovered over cutting boards, plates were held mid-air. They stared at the old man they knew as Arthur, who was now radiating an aura of power that was completely at odds with the shabby clothes he wore. But no one was more stunned than Leo. He looked from the transformed Arthur to the terrified Marcus, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The kind old man he had shared coffee with, the friend he had confided in, the one person who had shown him any compassion, was the owner? The reclusive, almost mythical Alistair Finch? It didn't make sense. It was like a scene from a dream, a bizarre, impossible fantasy. Alistair's gaze never left Marcus. His voice, when he spoke again, was devoid of all emotion, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "I have spent the last several weeks working in this kitchen, Marcus. I have seen everything. I've seen you skim from the register. I've seen you take kickbacks from the suppliers. I have seen you cheat the staff out of their rightful pay. And I have seen you systematically abuse and exploit the best man in this room." With each accusation, Marcus seemed to shrink, his blustering arrogance deflating like a punctured balloon. "But none of that matters as much as this," Alistair continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more intense. "You took a man's profound act of love and loyalty, and you twisted it into a business transaction for your own benefit. You saw goodness, and you chose to prey on it. You are a parasite, Marcus. And this company has no room for parasites." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone, a sleek, modern device that looked completely alien in Arthur's worn trousers. He pressed a single button. "Security," he said into the phone, his voice calm. "I need you in the main kitchen. We have a trespasser to escort from the premises." He put the phone away and looked back at Marcus, who was now trembling. "You are fired, of course. And I suggest you find a very good lawyer. Our corporate attorneys will be in touch with you regarding the matter of your criminal fraud." His final dismissal was devastating in its simplicity. "Now get out of my sight." The spell was broken. 2 large security guards entered the kitchen, and Marcus, without another word, allowed himself to be led away, a broken, defeated man. The kitchen remained silent, every person in the room staring at Alistair Finch, waiting to see what he would do next. Alistair turned away from the door where Marcus had disappeared, his expression of cold fury instantly melting away as his eyes landed on Leo. He walked over to him, his steps no longer the shuffle of Arthur but the confident stride of Alistair Finch. He stopped in front of Leo, who was still staring at him with a look of utter, bewildered disbelief. The entire kitchen staff watched, holding their collective breath. Alistair's voice, when he spoke, was filled with a gentle warmth and a profound, bone-deep sincerity. "Leo," he began, his voice soft enough that only Leo could hear it. "Everything you told me, everything you have done, I don't have the words to express my admiration for you. You are the finest man I have ever had the privilege of knowing." Leo just shook his head slowly, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of the last 10 minutes. "But why?" he stammered. "Why would you? Because I was lost," Alistair answered with a raw honesty that stunned the onlookers. "I had forgotten what was important. I had forgotten that my business is not about buildings or profits. It's about people. You reminded me of that. You, with your quiet strength and your limitless heart, you saved me, Leo." He placed a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. And now, I'm going to make things right." He raised his voice so the entire kitchen could hear. "Your friend, Samuel," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "He will receive the absolute best medical care in the world. My personal foundation will take over all of his expenses, starting immediately." The $20,000 for the new ventilator was transferred to the hospital 10 minutes ago. "We will fly in specialists from anywhere in the world if we have to. Whatever he needs, for as long as he needs it, he will have it." A collective gasp went through the kitchen. Leo's eyes filled with tears, this time not of despair, but of a hope so overwhelming it was painful. "And for Maya and her grandmother," Alistair continued, his gaze still locked on Leo, "a trust fund has been established in Maya's name that will see to her every need. Her education, her housing, her future. It is all taken care of. They will never have to worry about money again. This is not a gift from the company, Leo. This is a gift from your friend, Samuel, earned by the loyalty and love you have shown him." The tears were now streaming freely down Leo's face. The immense, crushing weight he had carried on his shoulders for so long was suddenly, miraculously lifted. He could barely stand, a sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaping his lips. He had done it. He had kept his promise. Samuel was safe. Maya was safe. The storm was finally over. Alistair let the news settle for a moment, allowing Leo the space to absorb the seismic shift that had just occurred in his universe. The rest of the kitchen staff remained silent, witnesses to a moment of grace so profound it felt sacred. Then, Alistair addressed Leo directly again, his expression serious but kind. "That takes care of your promise, Leo. Now, let's talk about yours." Leo looked up, confused. "My promise? The one you made to yourself a long time ago?" Alistair clarified. "The dream you told me about, the one about culinary school." He smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached his eyes. "The finest culinary institute in the country, the American Academy of Gastronomy, has a new, fully funded scholarship. It's called the Leo Vance Promise Scholarship. It's awarded to one student each year who demonstrates not just talent, but exceptional character and integrity. The first recipient has already been chosen." Leo stared at him, his mind slowly, tentatively daring to understand the implication. "No," he whispered. "I couldn't." "You can, and you will," Alistair said with gentle finality. "Your enrollment is confirmed. Your classes start in 1 month. All your expenses will be covered, of course. You will not have to worry about anything except honing your craft." He wasn't finished. "And when you graduate," he added, delivering the final, life-altering piece of his plan, "a job will be waiting for you. I'm opening a new restaurant. A smaller, more intimate place. Its founding principle will not be profit, but community. It will be a place where the food is honest, where the staff are treated with dignity, and where a portion of every single meal's profit goes to a fund for employees facing medical or family crises. It will be called The Promise, and it will need a head chef. That position is yours, Leo, if you'll have it." This was too much. The series of revelations had been one impossibility stacked upon another. To have his burden lifted was a miracle. To be given back his dream was a resurrection. Leo, the man who had felt invisible for so long, was now the center of a universe of possibilities. He looked at Alistair, the man he knew as Arthur, his friend, and he saw not a billionaire benefactor, but a man who had seen him, truly seen him, in the darkness of the alley and in the chaos of the kitchen. He could not speak. He could only nod, the tears flowing again, washing away years of quiet desperation and silent sacrifice, clearing the path for a future he had never, ever dared to imagine. 1 year later, the world was a different place. In a bright, sunlit room in a state-of-the-art rehabilitation facility, a man was taking slow, deliberate steps between 2 parallel bars. His name was Samuel, and his eyes, once vacant, were now clear and focused. Sitting on a nearby chair, cheering him on with every step, was a vibrant, happy 8-year-old girl. Maya's laughter echoed through the hall, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Her grandmother, Maria, sat beside her, her hands clasped in a prayer of gratitude. Alistair Finch's promise had been kept. The best doctors, the best therapists, the best technology had been brought to bear, and the result was a miracle that medicine alone could not explain. Samuel was on the long road to recovery, his journey fueled by the knowledge that his daughter was safe and his future was secure. Miles away, in the heart of the city, a new restaurant was the talk of the town. It wasn't the most opulent or the most exclusive, but it had a warmth that no interior designer could create. It was called The Promise. The critics raved about the food, its simple elegance, its profound honesty. They praised the atmosphere, the sense of welcome and community that seemed to emanate from the very walls. At a quiet corner table, Alistair Finch sat, no longer a jaded recluse but a man at peace, a man who had rediscovered his purpose. He watched the bustling dining room, a genuine smile on his face. He wasn't looking at the profits on a spreadsheet. He was looking at the happy faces of his employees who were treated like family and the satisfied smiles of his patrons. His gaze drifted to the open kitchen, the heart of the restaurant. There, moving with a calm confidence and an artist's focus, was Chef Leo. He was no longer the ghost of the dish pit, but a man fully alive, his face illuminated by the passion for his craft. He wore his chef's whites like a badge of honor, a symbol of his resurrected dream. The deep lines of exhaustion on his face had been replaced by the fine lines of laughter and concentration. He looked up, catching Alistair's eye across the room. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of shared understanding, of a bond forged in a cold alley and tempered in the fires of a hot kitchen. Alistair nodded back, his heart full. The promise had been kept, the debt had been paid. The cycle of kindness, started with a single, stale sandwich, had come full circle, creating a feast of hope for everyone it had touched. The story of Leo and Alistair became a quiet legend within the walls of Finch hospitality. It was a testament to the idea that true value is not measured in dollars, but in dignity, not in assets, but in empathy. Alistair, forever changed by his time as Arthur, went on to revolutionize his own company. He instituted new policies, ensuring fair wages, comprehensive benefits, and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of toxic management personified by Marcus. He created an anonymous employee relief fund, just as he had promised, ensuring that no one in his vast organization would ever have to face a crisis alone, the way Leo had. He learned that leading was not about dictating from on high, but about understanding from the ground up. He never lost the connection he had forged with the heart of his company, often visiting his kitchens not as a CEO, but as a friend, sharing a cup of coffee with the dishwashers and line cooks, the real engine of his empire. As for Leo, his success as a chef was secondary to the quiet joy he found in his life. He remained the humble, kind-hearted man he had always been. He spent his days off with Samuel, helping him with his physical therapy, the two friends laughing and reminiscing about their time in the dish pit, their bond now deeper than ever. He was a permanent fixture in Maya's life, the beloved Uncle Leo, who taught her how to bake and always showed up for her school plays. The final scene in this chapter of their lives was not one of grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. It took place late one night, after the promise had closed. The kitchen was clean and quiet. Alistair had stopped by, as he often did. He and Leo sat at a small steel table, the same kind they had once wiped down in another life. There were no rags or disguises, no titles or expectations. There were just two men, sharing a simple cup of coffee. They were no longer the dishwasher and the CEO. They were equals, bound by a shared history and a mutual, profound respect. In the quiet comfort of their friendship, the true moral of the story was written, that a single act of kindness, offered without expectation of reward, can ripple through the world, transforming despair into hope, and proving that the most valuable thing one person can ever give to another is to truly see them.